If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Bro, you ready for this one?
Yeah, I've been doing my homework.
I know, man. You've been hitting me up with the articles, and you're digging into this one, man.
Yeah, no, it was, I hope the listeners would find this fascinating, because it's been a while since we've talked about foreign aid issues. So this should be good. This should be deep.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I know, my perspective on something like this is a little bit more nuanced or a little bit more, let's say, fundamental than maybe the issue sort of seems to have it on the surface. But we'll get into that. What drew your attention to this? What made you so interested? I mean, as you said, we've sort of talked a little bit about stuff like this before, but why this issue? What's
Okay, yeah. So basically, we're talking about the coup in the country of Mali, and Canada's foreign aid. Has it been helpful for the country of Mali? And so, for those of you who don't know, on August the 18th, there was a mutiny in Mali. And so now the political system is in limbo, and they're waiting for the military to basically open up for a democratic election. So one of the issue, or three of the main issues that led to this coup and the overthrowing of the government, was the concern for jihadists, intercommunity violence, and corruption. Now, mind you, in 2012, there was a coup that led to this coup. So the leader who was overthrown, he came into power in 2012 from that coup.
and then now let's call it an unrelated coup. Or
I don't
maybe
even
that's
know.
too deep.
I can't even. I personally, I wouldn't say that per se, because it was the same coup that brought him in, and I'm assuming it's the same guys who took him out. And so one of the main concerns from the article from the Economist was saying that in Africa, especially, coups beget coups. Mali is a hub for smuggling drugs, arms, and people across Africa and to Europe. That problem may now worsen, but the West must shoulder some of the blame. The number of foreign troops in the southern fringe of the Sahel has grown, as well as hefty French and contingent soldiers from Britain, America, Germany, and countries next to Mali have weighed in, but they have done little to tackle the cause of the conflict: a weak, corrupt state with scant regard for its people. And so the people are mad because about 4,000 people were killed in the Sahel last year, around 40% of them in Mali. Since 2012, violence has spread from the north to the center of the country and across the region. The state has not only failed to stop the killing, it may have been complicit in it. So last year, about 160 people, mostly ethnic Fulanis, were massacred by a Dogon militia in Ogasawago. So a village in central Mali, Mr. Kita promised such atrocities would be stopped. Yet in February this year, tribesmen attacked Ogagasu again, killing 35 more. Human Rights Watch and International Monitor has documented how Mali's army let it happen, leaving the village just hours before the attack. So this is why the people are mad.
Yeah, and I mean, this is it's something I've brought up before, but in essence, corrupt government, corrupt, let's say the good foundation of the American experiment of, the idea of inalienable rights and a document like the Constitution, that it was intended to limit government, as opposed to, the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedoms actually is not limiting government. It's acknowledging the people's rights, as opposed to the American structure, which acknowledges that the rights pre-exist government and therefore restrains. But the reason I bring that up is to say, I've a number of times on the show, I've said, property rights is the solution, right? Corrupt government is a problem. No one's going to, or no one, but you're going to limit the amount you're willing to grow and invest your property if all of a sudden a government official could come along and say, you don't own that, it owns, some other guy owns it, by the stroke of a pen, right? And so this is a deep issue that, when we look across the water, or if we look at third world countries in general, I think so often it's easy for us to just say, okay, well, they're poor. They're, those countries are not where we are. We need to help them. But I think that this, the way you've laid it out, right? The level of corruption within their government, is something that we don't see, and hopefully we never will. But I think it sort of is a question, or the question of why are they not where we are is not asked enough. It's sort of just taken for granted.
And see, this is the fascinating thing, right? Because so President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, right? So he was basically, they took him hostage, and then he basically said, okay, yeah, you guys can have it. And he basically peacefully stepped down. And I don't know, man, there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of questions that still need to be answered in regards to what the heck is going on in Mali, and what is it that Canadians are doing?
Yeah, because there's three. Sorry, just for the audience, there's sort of three big articles that I've got that I'll put in the show notes page. One's from the Economist, so you'll need a subscription if you want to read it. But one from Reuters, one from Globe and Mail, just really focused on this issue. Do you want to tell the audience where did you pull most of what you've described from? Which of the articles you pulled that
from the Economist, from the Globe and Mail, and from the Government of Canada website. Okay,
and so what I've understood is that most of Canada's foreign aid, or not most, but a large portion of it. So here's a sort of sentence within the Globe and Mail's article, I think is good. Canada is one of Mali's biggest foreign supporters, providing a total of about $1.6 billion in developmental aid over the past 20 years, along with hundreds of military peacekeepers and police trainers. Other countries, including France, have sent thousands of soldiers and military vehicles to fight Islamist radicals. So a huge aspect of this is sort of a peacekeeping mission or peacekeeping foreign aid, yes, if you want to call it that. And so, there is a question, to your point, of like, well, what is Canada really doing? Are we really creating peace? Because, we had a co-op for what would you say was, did you say it was 2012? I think that's what you said.
Yeah. So we were there since 2012 when Amadou Toumani Touré was president. And then he was sent into exile when he was overthrown. So we've been there since that.
Yeah. So, it sounds like we came there after the last co-op, and clearly what we've been doing hasn't prevented another. And so, it's a question to say, is this the right thing? Should we continue to support, is where, all the articles are really, covering the issue, right? They're kind of leaving this question, the article for Globe and Mail, for example, the headline is Canada should rethink aid to Mali after two co-ops, analysts say, is the name of the article. So,
sorry, wait, did you say, why do you keep saying co-ops?
What did you say?
Coup.
Coup? Well, it's got a P on the end of it. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, it's the coup.
Coup, co-op,
Coup.
whatever. It's all good.
Co-op placement is when you're you're in high school.
Yeah, coup. Okay, I'll stick with coup.
Okay.
I'm just thinking like you co-opted the government.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no. It's
Yeah. So we're good. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
So I think, for you, when you've read and when you dug into this issue so much, because you're way more versed. I mean, I've got an understanding, but you've definitely dug into this way more than me. What, like, do you see that there's sort of an argument for Canada staying, even though, to some extent it's sort of a question of like, well, what good are we really producing?
Yes. So that's a good question, because when I was doing the research and I was looking at this thing, I was like, okay, so wait, what is Canada actually doing over there? But so you look at all the military, and then on our website, the Canadian government website, it says to achieve this, Canada's work in Mali focuses on increasing Canada's diplomatic engagement in Mali. Right. So I'm assuming that's in relation to trying to keep the peace politically. It talks about improving the lives of Malians, especially women and children, by reducing poverty and inequality through development programming. Doesn't say what it is. Providing vital humanitarian assistance to those in need. Doesn't say what it is. Supporting economic growth that works for everyone through promoting sustainable development and increased investments. Supporting security sector reform, including small arms and light weapons and management. Do a quick Google for me, Joel, and find out what light weapons are. Light weapons. Is that a Nerf gun? Is that a slingshot? I don't know. I don't know what light weapons management is.
My thought would be, like the police equivalent. That's sort of what I envision that to mean, as opposed to a military. I'm sure there's not going to be. I mean, small arms and actually, it's so funny.
Well, just do a quick Google. Okay, so next, supporting peace and reconciliation through a range of activities to promote stability, inclusion, and gender equality, counterterrorism, capacity building, and encourage dialogue between the government and armed groups to establish a lasting peace. And finally, preventing violent extremism and providing protection for crisis-affected civilians. So
I got an answer for you.
Okay.
It's gun control.
Okay. All right, it's gun control, but
right, like it's training and controlling the small and light arms.
Okay, that's fine.
Sort of be
okay, that's fine. So the question is, as Canadians in Canada's presence in Mali, in regards to supporting peace and reconciliation through a range of activities to promote stability, is it working? Preventing violent extremism and providing protection. Based on what I read prior from the Economist article, no. Like, if I could be as gracious as I can be, no, we haven't. I don't think it's working.
And I mean, this is why I say, like, I approach this issue from a more fundamental level, because the economics. So let me break it down as to let's like I don't want to say. Let's steelman the argument for foreign aid. So the simplest argument is the vicious circle of poverty theory was championed by Paul Samuelson. And sort of that argument is that countries need capital subsidies in order to develop, because they have no resources to spare to invest in capital. And so that sort of idea is that, a country like North America or continent like North America, we've developed because and in the last hundreds of years. And as a result, we've created excess. And when we create excess, we turn that into capital. That capital makes labor more productive, which then makes us more prosperous, because our labor is, we can produce more, and continually and then we continue to accumulate capital. So these countries are so poor that they need a capital injection to get them to the place where their labor is productive enough that they can continue to they produce more than they consume.
Yeah, but see, and this is where, I would, and maybe you would agree with me, but this is where I think foreign aid fails. I've been reading and I came across this economist named Dambisa Moyo. So she's an Oxford-trained African-American or African economist from Zambia. And she argues foreign aid is actually the main cause of continuing poverty in Africa. She explains that aid has prevented Africa from moving toward economic growth. So she goes on to say, so she goes on to say,
I agree.
So she goes on to say that has more than US $1 trillion in development assistance over the last several decades made African people better off. No, in fact, across the globe, recipients of this aid are worse off, much worse off. Aid has helped make the poor poorer and growth slower. The notion that aid can alleviate systemic poverty and has done so is a myth. Millions in Africa are poor today because of aid. Misery and poverty have not ended, but have increased. Aid has been and continues to be an unmitigated political, economic, and humanitarian disaster for most parts of the developing world. And so she goes on to say that she's not opposed to humanitarian emergency aid, which helps people affected by catastrophes, and neither is she opposed to the charity-based aid, which is dispersed by charitable organizations. So
it's the NGO, the NGO type stuff.
Yeah, so presumably by like religious groups, humanitarian agencies, or whatever. But she is opposed to aid payments made directly to governments, either through government-to-government transfers or through agencies such as the World Bank. So Moyo is
that's more of the NGO type of stuff that I was referring. Sorry.
Yeah. So she goes on to say that the reason why aid is so harmful is that foreign aid props up corrupt governments, providing them with free, usable cash. These corrupt governments basically interfere with the rule of law, the establishment of transparent civil institutions, and the protection of civil liberties, making both domestic and foreign investment in poor countries unattractive. Greater opacity and fewer investments reduce economic growth, which leads to fewer job opportunities and increasing poverty levels. So in response to growing poverty, donors give more aid, which continues the downward spiral of poverty. This is the vicious cycle of aid, the cycle that chokes off desperately needed investment, instills a culture of dependency, and facilitates rampant and systemic corruption. It perpetuates underdevelopment and guarantees economic failure in the poorest aid-dependent countries. Dambisa Moyo of Zambia. You guys need to check her out.
Yeah, we'll make sure to have something in the show notes page. It's so funny. I have an article from Tom DiLorenzo. Actually, it's a couple years back. It's from 2005. The title is "Foreign Aid Disaster" or "Foreign Aid is a Disaster in the Making," and he points out basically the exact same things. But he also said something I thought was really, really interesting was. Foreign aid actually lets corrupt interventionist governments off the hook for their counterproductive, if not disastrous, economic policies. And so you were sort of speaking more so to corrupt governments. But let's say what he made this line to me is also speaking to incompetent governments. Right? So governments who have made bad decisions have made their people worse off. The foreign aid actually subsidizes and incentivizes that bad behavior because, and I think this is where she would her point kind of resonates is that those governments have no incentive to change their behavior, because by not changing their behavior, they continue to get foreign aid. So it's sort of like an addict, right? You continue to give them the drug, unless you're trying to wean someone off the drug, basically you're going to continue their, bad behavior.
Yeah. No, and this is the thing, because like her book is very fascinating. It's called Dead Aid: Why Aid is Not Working and How There is a Better Way for Africa. And so it isn't necessarily, for me, it's teaching me that, foreign aid isn't necessarily the solution as it relates from government to government. I'm for private ventures, like she said, but I think when it comes to the military and the military's presence, that still is
a more peculiar.
Yeah, because dealing with jihadists and the threat of terrorism, personally, I take that seriously. And it's easy for me to talk here in my cozy
non-bombed country.
Yeah, but can you imagine what it's like living in a place where that's a threat, where your town or your city can be overtaken and that's it. So there's
the other aspect of that too is the corrupt government just
yes.
also being another threat, right?
Yes.
So you've got the jihadis on one side,
yes.
and you've got corrupt government on the other, arguably. Right. Like, we in America talk about like the government putting their boot on our necks, but we to some extent are highly ignorant to those scenarios.
The threat of that kind of corruption, whether you get it from the terrorists or you get it from your government. Hold on, let's continue to move forward, because we want to make an argument for both the pros and cons of Canada's presence in Mali. And so the first thing we got, or the first pro per se, is that from Fen Hampson, who's a professor of international affairs at Carleton University in Ottawa. And he said that there is a tendency to see Mali as a bit of a sinkhole because of the billions already spent by Western countries. It's a long-term problem, and you're going to have lots of failure. But at the end of the day, you have to ask the question, what is the alternative? So the alternative to pull back and walk away would not just mean destabilization in Mali and continuation of problems in the north, where you have both separatist elements and Islamic jihadists. So what is the better situation? Because if Canada pulls out, you're going to have possibly more mayhem, Malian mayhem.
Yeah, I mean, that argument to me, as much as like it sounds reasonable, it's sort of like, compared to what? Like how do you know, right? Like, and the reason I say how do you know, it's like, and the reason I'm not totally sympathetic to that argument is because we just look at the regime change wars with the US and Iran and Iraq and, all of that craziness that's been going on for 20 years. And we know that what they did with, I think it was with Saddam Hussein, basically made everything worse off, right? The US directly caused ISIS with what they were doing. And so the reason I bring that up, I mean, the best person on all of, in my opinion, is Scott Horton. I can put a link to him in the show notes page. But just when it comes to anything foreign, military, mostly US, but all of that type stuff, he's just a beast on these things, from trying to be objective, which is hard to find, I think, in my opinion. So I bring all that up to say, in the short term, obviously, if Canada was to pull out and they're providing military protection or let's say some level of protection for citizens that aren't, extremists or willing to wage war on their other citizens. Okay, yes, there's likely going to be some short-term consequences, but again, I go back to like fundamental question, like, in the long term, what does this country need? The long term, the country doesn't need Canada's occupation of the country, right? Like, Canada being on their soil is not what they need in the long term. We would all agree with that.
We wouldn't all agree.
Well, okay. For them to be better off, they would not need any other country to help maintain order of their country. Right? Canada may help them get there. My point was, in the long run, the goal should be for Canada not to be there. Right?
Yes.
Right, that's my point, right? So the question of how do they get to a place of stability on their own is the proper question. The way he's worded it, yes, he does say long term, but he says the alternative is to pull back and walk away. Well, okay, that sounds like a very, in my opinion, I would classify this as a false dilemma. Like there's probably a spectrum of things in between just walking away, pull your men out and don't do anything.
And I would agree. I wouldn't say necessarily to leave. I mean, we spent $140 million this year alone.
That's a drop in the bucket, bro. These guys have just been printing money. This is 2020.
but again, my heart goes out to the people in Mali, and that as Canadians, especially as a first world country, I still feel like there's still a responsibility for us to help out where we can. But again, it's very confusing because like we were there since 2012. We were there since the last coup.
Actually, it's the article for Global Mail said there was 2 coups since we've been there.
Really?
Yeah, I was just like, wait.
Yeah, I'm seeing one for 2012.
So it says after 2 military coups in Mali in the past 8 years. So 2012 was, I guess, the first one, and 2020. You said we've been present there since 2012.
Before that, actually.
Well, and I was going to say the article later in the article says we've been giving money for 20 years. So maybe the military presence didn't show up until 8 years ago. That sounds
but either way, it didn't prevent this coup, and so and now it kind of makes you say, okay, well, is it worth?
Well, that's a counter argument to this guy saying, like, he's saying, well, what's the alternative? Well, what we're currently doing isn't working.
Yeah, not
so. We need an alternative, and that's why I said I think he's presenting a false dilemma of like, well, the alternative is to just leave. Well, no, that's not just the alternative.
Okay, well, let's look at one of the cons from Chris Roberts, a political scientist at the University of Calgary who specializes in Africa and peacekeeping issues, and he said the heavy flow of foreign aid has allowed Mali's government to stall the political reforms and accountability measures that it badly needs. As most Malians on the street know, the international community is part of Mali's fundamental political crisis. It seems to support an entrenched political class.
Deep state.
So Mr. Roberts told the Globe and Mail that the years before the 2012 coup, and again in the years before the latest coup, Canada significantly expanded its aid for Mali. And he said Canada ramped up its bilateral aid to Mali as political malaise, corruption, and security dynamics got worse. He said, we ignored the direct and indirect effects of development and security assistance. Mali's political elites face no incentives to change, to improve institutions, elections, and accountability when they know the international community will keep the financial flows coming. Until we try harder to understand how high levels of aid foster an unaccountable political system, we are part of the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say his presentation isn't so much the reason to leave the military presence as it is the reason to stop giving money,
or even just to reduce.
Well, and like or change our approach, right? Potentially, let's say Canada sponsoring. No, sponsoring is not the right word, and of course, I'm not a big fan of Canada doing anything. But Canada sort of, let's say, helping. Let's say the Canadian government was to help humanitarian aid right? So if they're going to do things to give money to charities that are going to help the underprivileged in that country, whether it's with food, supplies, building wells, right? Like the humanitarian aspect would be a means to, in essence, circumvent the corrupt government. And so this is where, that article from Tom DiLorenzo that I read out or read that clip from, sort of plays into this, because it again, the statement he made is that these funds prevent corrupt what you were reading was focusing more so on the corrupt, and what I read sort of spoke to also just the incompetent or the government failures, right? So his arguments demonstrating that clearly the governance side of what this government is doing is failing this country, and by giving them money, we're not forcing them to reform. Or we're preventing them from actually making any sort of changes to help their citizens. And so it goes back to my attic analogy, that's sort of the trajectory that Canada or the foreign aid is helping them on. What's crazy, I have 4 articles from fee.org that span from like, the first one's from Henry Hazlitt in 1970. I think it's from a chapter of his book or one of his books. Foreign investment versus foreign aid. There's an article from 2001, The Sorry Record of Foreign Aid in Africa. And from 1990, The Failures and Fallacies of Foreign Aid. So I'll put in the show notes page for any, listeners who want to see a little bit more. And then I have a 2019 one as well. Can local solutions succeed where foreign aid has failed? So just these are all, economic arguments that have been made over and like these are 20 years later, same arguments being made, same, and you'll have different data points for a listener who wants to sort of see a legit counter argument to foreign aid. Because, the intention behind foreign aid, nobody is questioning the intention, right? Like the intention may be good. The question is it effective? And if it's not effective, why should we be doing something just because it has good intentions when it's basically failing?
And we also have to make sure that we're looking at the alternative, because like we don't want to create a false dilemma where it's saying, okay, because foreign aid doesn't work, that means we should just not give it all. Yeah, do nothing at all.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, as the libertarian voice, right? Like, compelled charity isn't really charity, right? So foreign aid is generally done through taxes, right? It's not like Canadian government is putting a call out to Canadians to support a charity that's helping, and it's totally voluntary. No, this is done, essentially they took your money by force, then they gave it to that country by force. So, it's not like, at least I would argue, it's not like Canadians can kind of say, yeah, we're doing this great thing through our taxes. Well, you didn't really voluntarily or make a choice to do this. So I'll digress on that point. But what I think is, another aspect of foreign aid that we didn't quite mention, and there's this term in economics called rent seeking. And foreign aid is because, and the quote you read out from your girl basically said, it's money from government to another government. So because the funds go to another government, it creates rent seeking. And this article from David Henderson, it's econlib.org. It's essentially defining rent seeking. But he said a better term is privilege seeking, because they use the term to describe people's lobbying of government to give them special privileges. So the idea is when you do foreign aid, you're creating opportunity for rent seeking or privilege seeking in this case, because people are going to lobby the government to get that money that this government has just gotten. Right. And this is why a government doesn't want to get rid of it, because that ability to distribute the funds gives them abundance of power. Because now everybody in the country, or all of the, let's say, other non-governmental powerful people or influential people, are now coming to them asking for these handouts because they just got a handout that they got to distribute. And clearly the way they've been distributing it hasn't helped the country. And arguably until the co-op or until the coup, it was helping there.
Well, you know what's so funny? There's another, like, it's coup d'etat. So it's COUP and then there's DETAT. So a coup or coup d'etat is the removal of an existing government from power, usually through violent means. Typically, it is an illegal, unconstitutional seizure of power by political faction, the military, or dictator. So let me ask you this. What's your 2 cents on this whole coup thing?
I think my 2 cents is that this is another example where well-intended activities, even good economic sort of underpinning, had good intentions, but as you start to look at the, let's call it empirical data, it doesn't play out, right? As you just, again, that quote you gave, and I've got her website, so I'll make sure it's in the show notes page. She basically said, or Dambisa, she said, like, you see, statistically speaking, countries that have foreign aid are not succeeding. We don't see them growing out of their poverty. And so as an economist mind, I've probably on the show said, I might not have said this on the show, but I think in economics, we have this big problem where stats drive economic theory. But this to me is an example where stats play the proper role. So that economic theory was that, well, these countries need capital assistance in order to get to the place where their labor is more productive to help with. So that was a great hypothesis. The data is showing that that hypothesis or that theory needs to be challenged. So in economics, my argument is that we take the data and then try to create a theory to explain it. What should be happening is you have a theory that you've logically sort of constructed or deduced based on other fundamental principles. And now you go to the real world to test with the data. When the data doesn't work, you figure out what is wrong with the theory or what is wrong with the application because the context is different. So I know I got kind of super technical in my economic nerdness, but I think this is a perfect example where government intentions are failing miserably, but because their intentions are good, we keep doing what we've been doing. And I would also argue, go look at Trudeau's failed attempt to end up on some UN special council. This is an example of why he wouldn't cut foreign aid, because when you're trying to end up on a, non-governmental special body in the UN, you're going to do everything you can to look like you're part of the United Nations and doing everything you can. And so the spending of this money is also due to bad incentives, even though its intentions might be good.
Man, what's going on in Mali is a hot mess. It's a hot mess, man. And, there's no easy answer. I think the thing that sticks out to me is that not just what's going on in government, but also what's going on with the people. And we see that, that there's a history of within Africa of coups, right? Where people are constantly overthrowing the government, right? And you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, look, we see a coup in 2010 in Nigeria. We see one in 2012 in Mali, one 2013 in Egypt. We see one in 2017 in Zimbabwe, and in 2019 in the Sudan. Like the Economist article said, like, it seems like in Africa, coups beget more coups. Right. Right. And it's just like, it almost seems like, well, okay, well, they set up a democracy. In a sense, you kind of have to let it, take its course, and respect for law and the respect for government. Yes, the government is totally not doing its job in regards to protecting the people, but at the same time, it goes both ways, and I think it's really sad to see that. Yeah, you're having problems on both ends. It's not just to say, okay, well, if we put the right leadership in place, like who's to say if we put the right leadership in place that the people, the military might, try to overthrow them because they don't like what's going on. Right. So I guess I would have to do more research on.
Well, it's so funny because as you were talking about it, I think of like, what was the real purpose of the Second Amendment was that, the people were a well-armed militia to prevent the government from doing, or from the military taking over the government. Mm-hmm. Right. Or from government becoming tyrannical with the power of the military behind them, because the military was the well-armed militia of the people. So, it's, again, I don't know how much does that play into the solution for countries like this. Do you, but it just makes me think of, what, again, let's ask some more fundamental questions. What is different about countries that succeed from where these countries are at? Look at the countries who had a coup and are no longer there. I don't know if there are any, but or the countries that have never had a coup, what exists there that's being successful? And I would argue, unfortunately, that many government perspectives doesn't want to acknowledge that maybe some of the reasons that, or some of the successes are when government has less power, when government is more laissez-faire. So they're never going to promote those solutions because that means their ability to influence those countries gets diminished.
Yeah, no, I don't see that being. but I still think if I could leave the listeners with something, I would say that as Canadians, I think it's important, especially as tax-paying Canadians, it's important to know where your money's going and what it's doing. So that way, you have a better understanding. And at some points you can say, okay, well, you can voice your opinion. And I think the more people know about it, the more you can have a say in what's being done with your tax dollars and what's being done in Mali.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fair point. I think, I would say I'll expand that even further. Like tax dollars in general, right? Like how much do Canadians really know where their money goes? Where, and maybe we should care a little bit more because maybe we would challenge the government and how much they tax us more.
Yeah. But as far as like from my heart, it does break my heart seeing all the foolishness that's going on and the people dying and jihadists and so forth and terrorism. And so that's why I'm for Canada being there and having a military presence. I believe in, love your neighbor, Matthew 22:39. But then we also see that in Obadiah 11, God through Obadiah, he's rebuking the nation of Edom because the Jews are taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And so we see that, God is still for intervention and for nations defending each other if possible. So, I pray that, Canada will be able to make a difference, but statistically, I'm not seeing the difference. I'm still on the fence and I got to do more research, man. But as far as like, I'm not for us totally leaving, but trying to make a difference where we can.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
And I'll leave it with a simple line. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity.
Let us know what you guys think. Is this your first time hearing about what's going on in Mali? What do you think would be the best solutions? And prior to the episode, what was your view on foreign aid? Because I know mine prior to that was, foreign aid is a open shut case. Send as much money as you can to help. But the research shows that the handouts to third world countries doesn't necessarily help. So let me know what you guys think. You can contact us at sixcentsupport@gmail.com. You can contact us on Facebook and Twitter. If you're trying to get in touch with me, it's do-good@Darnell, DOGUDDA_Darnell on Twitter, Instagram, and Darnell Samuels on Facebook.
And I'm TJoelN39 everywhere. Definitely had some good conversations with listeners recently. So keep up the communication. We like it. It helps us, challenges us, gives us feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like. And I mean, the last listener who reached out gave me some more content on our charter schools episode. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, shout out.
Thank you for sharing your 2 cents.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?